Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for that introduction. It's really fantastic to be here today. It's so exciting to be in this space. I've only been here once before for the launch, so it's really exciting to be here. And I should probably start with another admission, which is, in addition to that introduction, I was also born and grew up in Milton Keynes and left when I was 18, so you'll have to forgive me the odd personal reflection on what I'm talking about today. Now, I do have 15 minutes to tell the entire history of art in new towns, which is pretty much impossible. So I'm going to just touch on perhaps those key mechanisms and events which led to the situation we're going to be talking about for the rest of today. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the TCPA, just to explain why we're so interested in garden cities and new towns, we were founded in 1899 by Ebenezer Howard and his supporters to actually deliver his vision for new garden cities. And then Frederick Osborne of the TCPA then drove the post-war New Towns movement, campaign for that within government. And since then, we have been working on the delivery of large-scale development in all its context, but we also do a huge amount of work on all of the outputs of planning, from climate change to green infrastructure to health and planning. But we're here talking about new towns today. Now, much of what I'll be talking about has emerged from some research that we've been undertaking for ongoing since about 2014, which is about the lessons from the garden cities and the new towns, because we've been having this campaign for recognition of the role of large-scale communities as part of the portfolio of solutions to address the current housing crisis. But we're also really conscious that we've been here before. You know, we need to learn from the past, understand what worked and what didn't. So do check out our research. That's also led us to work a lot with the New Town authorities. We're Secretariat for All-Party Parliamentary Group on New Towns, which, if you're interested in, do get in touch. And we're also working with New Places Delivering Communities today through our New Communities group, and you'll be hearing from some of them later this afternoon. Now, the story about art in new towns in general, essentially, you know, could argue starts half a millennia ago with Thomas More's Utopia. And in fact, I could just not say anything now. I could just say, go and see the exhibition downstairs, because it basically explains everything which I wanted to say in this slide. But I think what's really important to understand about why art and culture was so important in the post-war new towns was that direct influence of the garden city movement. And when Ebenezer Howard wrote Tomorrow back in 1898, and his idea of marrying town and country, which everybody's familiar with, what's perhaps lesser known or perhaps less recognised is the importance of the thinking that was happening at the time and that heavily influenced Howard. All of these artists and thinkers, from Edward Carpenter to John Ruskin to Morris, they were all thinking about how are we going to live? And really importantly, what is the relationship between art and nature and how that affects how people want to live? And if you haven't read The Art of Building a Home, I do commend it to you. There's some fantastic essays in there which explain the importance of the relationship in art and nature, not just in the wider environment, but Unwin goes on to talk about the importance of having space to share the consumption of food within your home. It's really exciting. And of course, those ideas were core principles of the Garden City movement and translated into the two Garden City experiments, Letchworth Garden City and then Welwyn as well. And in fact, the first public building to open in Welwyn Garden City was the theatre. And I think it's really important when we're talking today, when we're talking about art, we also talk about culture, because it's not just about sculptures and murals, it's also as much about theatres and other cultural opportunities. Now, I do need to be I'm a lot quicker than I'm being, so bear with me. There was the whole interwar time when sprawling housing estates were built, supposedly along Garden City lines, and the TCPA was really worried that the actual Garden City vision was going to be lost for a generation. But also Frederick Osborne was really clear that the Garden City experiments, though they were exciting and kind of working well, there was going to need to be a much broader approach, and really government needed to play a role if we were going to get the scale and type of development that we needed. And of course, with the Second World War, there'd actually been a huge amount of work undertaken about planning for post-war reconstruction and the role of new towns. And the Ruth report set out in detail how these new towns were going to be delivered. But the context of them is really, really important. So it wasn't just about planning for post-war reconstruction and providing homes for all of those people who'd lost them over those 6 years of house building that had been lost. But it was also about providing a new future for the citizens of the country. And Lewis Silkin, minister at the time, had the ambition no less to produce a new type of citizen. And it's really important that he said, a healthy, self-respecting, dignified person, but this sense of beauty, culture, and civic pride. And that really shows the influence of the Garden City movement, because it's about making sure that places are created which lift the spirits of those who live there. Now, 32 new towns were delivered through the New Towns programme, but when the New Towns Act was eventually passed in 1946, it was based on this powerful combination of site designation, as well as the creation of a development corporation, which had powers to do anything necessary to deliver the town. Now, this picture here, this is Milton Keynes Development Corporation in 1970. I don't know if there's anyone in the room which is in this picture, or knows people in it, possibly, don't know. I just love it so much, so we use it a lot. But what's really, really important to understand is not just the land assembly powers and the way the new towns were financed, but that these really powerful delivery bodies also had a really clear remit, not just to deliver homes, but to create socially balanced communities. It was about providing jobs and homes and the infrastructure and the social facilities to give people a rich and varied cultural life. And the way this materialised was partly through the fact that many of the development corporations employed town architects and town artists, specifically to deliver these opportunities within the new towns, and we'll be hearing lots about those later today. And this wasn't just about the fantastic pieces of public art and sculpture. It was also about creating a sense of belonging and a sense of event in the new towns, particularly for those communities who had perhaps left, the close social networks of East London, for example, and had come to the new towns. There's lots of talk about new town blues, and there's a lot of discussion about whether that was real or not. But the idea of having officers who were specifically tasked with welcoming new residents and creating events and social interventions to encourage people to feel part of the community was a really, really important part of the New Towns programme. Now, how did this materialise? We're going to hear from a lot of different places today, so I thought I'd just try and touch on some of the places we might not hear from. But before I do that, I am going to talk about Milton Keynes because it is my hometown, and it's great being first because it means that I know I'm the first one to show any of these photographs. Now, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot about art and culture in Milton Keynes today, but I just wanted to, I chose these pictures in particular because they mean something in particular to me. I remember being a very small child and going to Milton Keynes Library and reading my books and seeing this picture, this mural on the wall, and always admired it and was fascinated by it. And I think that just demonstrates something that was mentioned earlier about the personal relationship that people develop with public art when they're living somewhere. And I think that was a really important part of the identity of people that lived and grew up in new towns. So quite often, people that have never visited or lived in or know anything about Milton Keynes, you say Milton Keynes and they say concrete counts and roundabouts. But anyone who has lived in Milton Keynes, they're certainly not the first things which spring to mind. And I've also got a picture here of the Milton Keynes Bowl. And the reason I put that up, not only because it was demonstrated that Development Corporation had ambitions to deliver this wider cultural agenda, but it's also to symbolise that idea of performing arts. And it was mentioned earlier as well, that the joke about yoghurt and there being no culture in Milton Keynes. I think the unseen culture is really, really important to recognise as well. So growing up in Milton Keynes, yes, there were pubs to go to and one nightclub, but what actually happened is there was a huge music movement. Everybody I knew was in a band. We went to see live music all the time. And there was a fantastic piece written by Colin Ward, which looked at some research about people involved in music and new communities. And I couldn't find the quote, but it's saying there were more people involved in music in Milton Keynes than anywhere else in Europe. And I think it just goes to show we need to acknowledge those kind of more informal arts and cultural activities. And of course, the way they were used to encourage people to come and live in the new towns and promote them. I use this picture all the time, and it was ages before I realised my sister's actually in that red balloon picture, which is really nice. So really quickly, just two other examples. Perhaps one of the more famous examples of intervention is in PETERLEE, Newtown. Now, the master plan for PETERLEE was actually designed by Bertold Lubetkin originally, but there were real problems with delivery to do with subsidence of the mines, and he eventually resigned. And the Development Corporation were really worried that what had been a really exciting architectural project was becoming banal, as they said. So they employed artist Victor Pasmore as an advisor on housing and design, and he was given two huge areas of PETERLEE to oversee the design of the housing and of course the creation of the sort of famous Apollo pavilion there. Now it was really interesting, I love this picture of him standing in front of the pavilion covered in graffiti, because it got trashed basically, and people were saying, oh, what is this concrete eyesore, we need to get rid of it. But he stood there and he said, no, I think it's fantastic, people are claiming this as their own, but you can demonstrate that by the graffiti. So he really stood his ground on that. And I've included this picture of GLENROTHES. Sorry if anyone's Scottish, because I don't know how to pronounce it. So what is it? GLENROTHES, it is that, thank you. Just to demonstrate, I could have put up a picture of Stevenage or Basildon or Harlow, lots of those places we're going to hear lots about, but just to demonstrate that this really did apply across all of the 32 new towns, across all of the nations. And this is artist Dave Harding, who made a real impact on the town, and you can see how he involved local school children in that. And I've included this picture, which is by a different artist, these hippos in this housing estate, because I think, again, it's about that personal relationship, because I think anyone that has grown up in a new town, it was those informal, what seemed like random placements of small bits of sculpture in your estate, which to anyone visiting would seem like oddly placed, but actually they became part of your own personal narrative and personal geography of place, and I think that's really important to remember today. Just got a couple more slides, try and keep to time. Now, one of the important things to realise about perhaps more context of what we're talking about today and why arts and culture are as they are in new towns is partly about how the New Towns programme ended. Now, already by the 50s, the new towns, some of the early ones were beginning to reach the end, the development corporations were beginning to reach the end of their life as they felt it, and the new towns went in and out of political favour with various governments, and in 1959, the Commission for New Towns was set up to take on some of the assets of the new town development corporations as they wound up. But by the time we got to the 1970s, there were lots of trouble in the inner cities, meaning that by the time Margaret Thatcher's government came in, they were really keen to stop investing in the new towns and focus all of their resources on the inner cities. Now, what happened next is perhaps is without a doubt the key failure of the post-war New Towns programme as it was delivered. And that's in that the order was made to wind up all of the development corporations very quickly, immediately, with their assets sold off either to the public sector in the majority or given to local authorities in what were called balancing agreements. And those were supposed to be a balance of liabilities and assets. But of course, what happened over time with changes in policies is a lot of those assets became liabilities in themselves. So stripping of those assets, I've got 1 minute left, thank you, has meant that many of the new towns are now struggling to find the resources to look after these fantastic facilities which were provided. And there are exceptions. The 3 exceptions that I'm aware of, please let me know if there are others, are the Parks Trust in Milton Keynes, which means that you were able to look over this fantastic resource today, the Milton Keynes Community Foundation, and also the Neen Park Trust in Peterborough. And it's learning from that we really understand what opportunities there are if we can capture and reinvest that land value for long-term stewardship. I do just have 2 more slides. Now, the new towns today, they do still provide homes for 2.8 million people, and they represent some of the fastest growing, but also some of the most deprived communities in the UK. And some of those interventions of artists and town architects haven't stood the test of time. You know, Pasmore's housing looked fantastic, but the roofs leaked and they're difficult to insulate. And all of these challenges of trying to renew whole estates at the same time. But as demonstrated here, there are many examples of how that heritage of art and culture is being used as a catalyst for the regeneration of the new towns themselves. Now, we're going to be hearing from some of these projects today. We're sat in one of them. But things like the underpasses, which are criticised by people as being unsafe, and those that grew up in new towns know that it means you can cycle from one side of the city to the other without having to cross the road. There are some really exciting projects where involving local artists and school children to try and provide renovation and ownership of some of those projects. And you can find out more about those on our website. We've been doing a lot of work on the role of modernised garden city principles in delivering new communities today. I won't touch much on this because we're going to talk about it this afternoon, but one of the guides that we've done on delivering modern garden city principles is about art and culture. There is so much talk about housing numbers, but it's really, really important, we think, and I'm sure most of you in the room think, that creating places which are vibrant and which people are really excited to live in is just as important, and there are ways of funding it if we can organise ourselves properly. And I will end it there. We've written our second book about Newtown Renewal, which is going to be out next year. And I think it says a lot about the fact, this is the cover for it, by the way, which we're really excited about. Paul Catchell, printmaker, did it. And you can see Harlow and Peterlea there. But I think I've flashed this up not only to promote the book, but also to show the importance of art and culture of new towns in their identity. Quite often when you say the name of a new town, it is that public art which people think of first. And I think that's something to bear in mind when we're building new places today. And I'll leave it there.